Welcome back to Lead. Let's continue with the world lead and bring in my guest, Republican Senator John Barrasso. He's a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us, as always.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate being with you, Jake. Thank you.
So Senator Marco Rubio, he's a fellow Republican, a fellow member of the Foreign Relations Committee. He today drew a straight line between Secretary of State Rex Tillerson suggesting that the U.S. would not be the ones to take Assad out of power and the horrific chemical weapons attack in Syria. Take a listen.
It's concerning that the Secretary of State 72 hours ago or a week ago, last Friday, said, that this is the future's up to the people in Syria on what happens with Assad, in essence almost nodding to the idea that Assad was going to get to stay in some capacity. I don't think it's a coincidence that a few days later we see this. Assad believes, and sadly he may be right, that he can gas his people with sarin, kill children, kill innocent civilians. People will complain, there'll be a meeting at the UN Security Council, and then life will go on, and he'll stay in power. He's made that calculation. The Russians support him on it. China is indifferent. And I hate to say this, I think he's going to get away with it again.
Do you agree with what Senator Rubio says, both in terms of Secretary of State Tillerson and also in terms of the general response of the world?
Well, a couple of things. One is this is a horrific attack against humanity. Anyone that's seen the video understands that completely. I do believe that Assad feels emboldened, but emboldened because he has Russia on the ground right now in Syria, and because he had Russia and China both doing his bidding at the United Nations, vetoing the efforts that we had in a worldwide effort to put additional sanctions on Syria. So I think that Assad feels emboldened for a number of reasons, and that's the way I look at it.
Do you think that one of those reasons includes the fact that the Secretary of State basically announced that the United States government has a new position and no longer believes that regime change in Syria is necessary?
Well, I think President Trump made his statement as well today about the number of lines that this has crossed. The red line that was talked about by President Obama may need to be enforced now by President Trump. But Assad is emboldened in ways that he hadn't been before, and President Trump's job is that much more difficult, as the Washington Post editorial said this morning, because of the failures of the Obama administration in terms of getting rid of the chemical weapons, in terms of basically allowing Russia to be engaged and on the ground in Syria.
Okay, but with all due respect, sir, you didn't answer my question. Does Secretary of State Tillerson's statement basically that Syria is going to decide whether or not Assad is their ruler and the United States is not going to have anything to do with it, which Marco Rubio says is one of the reasons why Assad felt emboldened?
No, I listened to what Nikki Haley said today at the United Nations, that the United States may need to act, and I listened to President Trump and his statements today along similar lines.
While we're talking about Nikki Haley, listen to her this morning at the UN Security Council.
And Russia has shielded Assad from UN sanctions. How many more children have to die before Russia cares?
Nikki Haley taking Putin to task there. President Trump did not mention Russia or Putin in his statement. Why not, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure why not. Look, Putin is actively involved and is providing basically cover for Assad through his involvement in Syria. It's that much more difficult of a situation now on the grounds. I thought Nikki Haley gave a very strong speech, talked about the need for action, and it's time for people at not just the United Nations, but around the world to say we need to do more. This activity must stop, and it may be important for the United States to step in. The last time with President Obama, when he first asserted the red line and then ultimately said any attack would have been just a pinprick, that is not the kind of decisive action that would deter additional attacks like Assad has been doing now in Syria to his own people.
Senator, stay with us. We're going to take a very quick break. I want to talk about the fact that there is this other burgeoning world crisis having to do with North Korea. Stay with us. We'll take a quick break. Welcome back to the lead. We're sticking with the world lead. We still have with us Republican Senator John Barrasso. He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, let's turn to North Korea and its latest missile launch. The response from Secretary of State Tillerson was surprisingly brief. He said in his paper statement, quote, North Korea launched yet another intermediate range ballistic missile. The United States has spoken enough about North Korea. We have no further comment. Translate for that for us. What message is the U.S. sending with that? What message should the U.S. be sending?
Well, the message that we are sending, I believe, is that the North Korean leader wants attention, wants credibility, And I think the less you say, the better about that. But North Korea's capacity is increasing. And if you want to deter somebody, you have to use what we have as our own capacity, which is significant, our willingness to use that capacity, our commitment to do that, and I believe we are ready to do that. We have defensive missiles now deployed into the areas of South Korea and in Japan, and then you have to communicate your willingness to take action. And now we're seeing that in a much different way than we've seen in the previous administration. I think the North Korean leader needs to recognize that, but additionally, the president of China is visiting with President Trump this week. China has a consequential role to play as well in terms of economic relationship with North Korea. They can be sending a very strong message and an impact on the North Korean economy to slow down the actions that we're seeing with North Korea and their efforts for testing and for nuclear weaponization.
So you referred to defensive missiles that the U.S. could deploy or has deployed in the area to respond and to deter North Korea from acting. But let me talk about the fact that President Trump has said everything's on the table here. The other day, he told the Financial Times, quote, China will either decide to help us with North Korea or they won't. And he went on to say, if China is not going to solve North Korea, we will. Now, we wondered what that might mean. We looked into all the president's comments about North Korea going back 20 years. And in a 1999 Wall Street Journal op-ed, Mr. Trump wrote, quote, I would let Pyongyang know in no uncertain terms that it can either get out of the nuclear arms race or expect a rebuke similar to the one Ronald Reagan delivered to Muammar Gaddafi in 1986. In other words, a bombing of North Korea. Is that on the table, do you think? Should it be on the table?
Well, with deterrence, all things are on the table, and you don't want your enemy to know exactly what you're going to do. You want them to know you have the capacity to do it, which we do. What the president is saying there, we have the commitment if we need to use it, and that's what he's communicating as well. That, to me, sends a strong message to North Korea that we have the ability and we'll do it if necessary.
Senator John Barrasso, always a pleasure to have you on, sir. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.